Hello everyone and welcome back. I hope you do enjoy the environment series that I've been doing for months now, especially the last one. I think that went pretty well, the Scarif Island biome. Lots of views, lots of great feedback on it, so I think I will be continuing this journey, creating more environments, and this tutorial is also about an environment. This is way more complicated than the Scarif one. We have lots more different species that I am scattering throughout the environment. It has started out in Gaea, where I use tile rendering or tile batching. I don't know what's the word for Gaea, but especially creating a 24K environment, which is 5 kilometers essentially wide, and doing like some camera flyovers, right, as you saw in the intro video. So pretty cool stuff. Lots of new techniques and different ways using the lab's biomes. And I'm also using some USD assets and some Megascan stuff. And yeah, all in all, a new way of working. And I think with every video that I do, I refine my workflows. And as usual, the stuff is on Patreon. If you want to support me, I'm getting huge sales in my shop, by the way. It's actually really nice to depend on that. So thank you everyone who's supporting me on Patreon. Much appreciated. And I would say let's dive into this arid, dry desert looking landscape. It was pretty fun for me to do, and I hope you will enjoy it as well. So let's dive into it, and we start out with Gaea, and then we head into obviously Houdini, and then in the end into Nuke. So thanks, and let's get into it. Alright, so this is my first time working in Gaea, and I had quite fun if it did not crash, and it crashed quite a bit, so you know, it was not always fun, but it is how it is. And I'll just show you the process I did in Gaea to give me the results of our environment here. So it's not a very complicated graph, I would say. It just has a couple of nodes, a draw node to be a little bit more creative. Initially, how it works, I just sought out with these basic nodes, ridges, rugged, and slump. So I just customize them to my liking with these little preset buttons here. And then I combined them using max operations just to break up the surface a little bit with different kind of surface properties like this. And then I used the draw mode to kind of draw some kind of valley. This is kind of where I want, like these top things here is where I want the valley to be the lowest. And then I applied, after the draw, I applied the distance node, and I made sure that I invert the output, so whatever is top will be bottom. And then I also applied some warping to it, so it's a little bit, the surface is a little bit broken up. You can see if I remove it, it gets really simple, and then the more you warp it, the more kind of details you can get in here. And then you have a distance fall off from your original drawing. So that's my initial kind of valley. And then I kind of just soften it out to create a really nice kind of terrain, I would say. And then I also have some kind of breakup on that as well, and I'm kind of multiplying this as well with my original thing, just to get different heights in essentially my operation, to combine it with the 3 green nodes at the top here. So the combined node is using min operation, and which just means, hey, take the smallest essentially from both inputs. And you can see this is my draw mask, where you can see the really flat surfaces is where my valleys are. And then after this, I was quite happy with the result. This is a 5 kilometer environment. I just applied a couple more of these default nodes, fractal terraces, to get some interesting stepping on this. Rockscape, which adds these little rocks all over the place. And obviously these parameters, you can look them up, copy them if you feel like it. I will attach obviously the Gaea scene file as well if you want to support me on Patreon. Then I applied erosion. You can see we get these nice kind of erosion places here. Rock noise, more details, terrain height, which kind of gives me the, you know, rivers, so I can use them later on. I can zoom out a little bit. There we go. And then this was my environment. So I was quite happy with the look. And obviously we're just viewing it at 1K resolution. And I exported this on, I think, 16K, if not a bit more. Texture base, these are my texture outputs. So I'm just obviously playing with so many slope values I want to have, flows, and all of these things. I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm just sliding the values until I thought something looks great. Rock maps, I'm going to disable this. So just high frequency noise essentially. Then this is a mask to give me kind of steeps, like vertical cliff faces. Then I have the opposite flat faces, and I've got my river mat, which I'm using in texturing or shading later on. I'm combining the rock map and the texture base here to give me some high frequency little black dots all over the place. And then from there on, I'm using the set map and creating some kind of, you know, satellite texture look. I can also, I don't play with it. Sometimes if I play with these viewport buttons, Gaea just seems to crash, so I just don't touch them. Different set maps, actually 3 different ones, and then I'm combining them with a steep surface mask. So I'm extracting kind of whatever is very almost vertical, and for that I'm applying, I guess, the gray stone look. And then for the rest, I get this look, and then I'm combining them. You can see that the vertical faces have a little bit different texture than the other ones. And then this one is the flat area. So whatever is at the top, like this, will get more of the red. If I'm combining them, you can see the flat faces have red. Other things are kind of greenish, and then the verticals are kind of the other thing. Yes, so as I said, this was output in a tiled bake. And honestly, Gaea updated while I was in the project, and I was able to actually utilize it before. It was just a nightmare exporting this. So either way, you would go to build, select your things you want to build, and then in the build settings, what I did in the end was, let's actually figure this out if I can. I went, I think, to 24K, slower mode, tiled version, 4K. Yeah, this is what I used. So in the end, I exported 24K, the slowest subdivision thing, and then 4K tile sizes. Anything bigger than this, 32, crashes, or not crashes, but the result is broken. Like the tiles itself have some arbitrary colors. It's at least as if it's really broken. And then, yeah, I could not go any bigger. I didn't want to output 124 tiles, so that's crazy. So I could live with 32, which is a really good detail, honestly, on 4K. And I exported that and used this. So I can try to bump up the resolution. Now let's go maybe 4K. It will take a bit of time, I guess, to build, but then you just can see the detail. All right, took a minute to kind of build everything, and this is now the 4K look of it. And you can see it's actually very detailed, and this river here is where I kind of measure things from, is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, around 5 meters wide. So that's kind of, it's not very wide, it's still not super big, but this is kind of the valley here. And then our camera is kind of flying, if I'm not mistaken, let's see, over one of these ridges. I think it must be this one. Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's this one. So we're flying over here and then traveling over different angles, and the water flows like this, and then the final shot is somewhere here-ish and traveling over like this. So that is the 4K version, and as I said, this was a, what would I say, 24K, so it's essentially still a lot more detail. So twice, almost 3 times more details on the final export. And I did not export the mesh or anything. I just exported the displacement maps, aka the height fields. And then I did all the rest of the magic in Houdini. And this is where we are heading now. So that was a quick Gaea thing, and we are back in Houdini. All right, so we are in the stage, and that's the only kind of context I'm working these days in. So all the rest is pretty much unused. I'm just in stage, and then I'm doing things. I do have the ROPs, so to render things on deadline, but everything else is in LOPs for the most part. And I'm walking you through the process now of how I created the scattering and how I applied the environment from Gaea here. And it's actually a really fun thing I was able to figure out. It's quite efficient, I would say, and works fairly well. You can see I've got terrain, foliage, debris, and foliage manual. I'll explain that in a sec. But essentially, we've got these 3 nodes that generates the whole thing. And then we have our reference. Actually, forgot about this. I rendered it. I'm not sure where Tommy is placed. We've got shot cameras. We have a little bit of context variables, Solaris context options to apply scatter, frustum culling, and jump between shots. Camo render settings, and then physical sky is all I used. That's it. So the overall scene, at least the node graphs, are super simple. Okay, so let's hop into terrain and walk you through everything. You can already see there's a full loop going on, and I'm starting out with a grid, and this was a little bit trial and error just to get things sorted, setting things up. And I had to apply a couple of offsets in here, which offset the UVs. In the end, this is my UV grid that I created using this little system. Oh, I'm not sure why this appears, but essentially what I'm doing, I'm checking the grid. So this is the grid size I'm exporting using in Gaea. So it's a 6x6 tiled output, and size is 2K, whatever. And I'm sorting the primitives, which are these guys. Initially, the grid primitives were, I don't know, something like this. I'm not sure what this line is there. But in the end, I just sorted them, and you can see that the order of each of the grid on the tiles are ordered properly. In the end, I did a full loop. Honestly, I don't know what these leftover things are. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, then I had to pivot and transform and scale things a little bit on the UV side just to get things going. So without the order, things were not placing the textures in the end properly. So I had to export the tiles from Gaea, let's say the base color, apply it, and then muck around with these offsets until everything was working as expected. But yeah, so that's the setup. So if you want that, obviously it's in my Patreon if you want to get the scene files. Then I'm fusing everything together, so I have a nice grid, and then I'm just applying subdivisions just so I have a little bit more fidelity for culling and such. But essentially this is the terrain, and that's all I had. And then I'm just applying a displacement map to it, and then everything gets kind of pushed out, and I just cached it out so I don't have to regenerate this. But for the terrain itself, it's fairly quick. I will show obviously the texture side as well, how we load in all the tiles, because it is quite complicated setup. Obviously once you get it working, it's fine. Setting the purpose using a script. So that is just, so this thing here, whenever it's loaded in Solaris, it will come in as a render purpose. So usually I preview in Solaris under proxy, so that's why it does not show. If I go to final render, then oh, there it is, but it's just flat, so it doesn't help much. That's why it's here. And this fancy system I really love. Someone on the CG Wiki Discord helped me. It's essentially, it generates, oh, that's what it was. Okay, that's what it was. So this was a kind of reference. So now it's obviously clean, the primitive display here. So that's fine now. Anyways, what's happening? A really fun thing. It's a box essentially with the center value connected to channel X. And then this little vex thing essentially converts the points to the camera space, so I can generate a geometry-based frustum. So super helpful. And I also created a recipe for this. I believe camera. Oh, forgot what was it. Well, I'll figure it out. I thought it was called GeoFrustum. Anyways, and then based off that, I'm creating a culling group, and whenever it intersects with my little geo box, I'm then removing the points. So it's quite efficient, and it's a nice way to frustum cull based on camera. Anyways, at the bottom here, I'm applying the material. You can see, oh, matnet terrain mat. So let's hop in here. And the terrain mat is this guy. So I'm loading the base color from my Gaea output, and I'm loading it using the UV abbreviation. So you can go load it and then make sure to set this to UV tile, and then you pull it in, and then you get this proper syntax. And I'm doing this for the mats, for the base color. Doing simple color corrections just to get things a bit more interesting, adding breakups on the ridges. I can actually show it. Let's see if everything goes well. So we are viewing from here. I can go, let's grab one physical sky from down there, and then view from here, pin the view, and go ComX view. And yeah, so this is the terrain rendered, all the textures coming in. And if I go down into the matnet again, and for example, obviously if I disconnect displacement, then it will be flat again. So I'll just keep that going. So I have this hexile triplanar. If I view this using X, this is my triplanar mat, and it has just some, you can see some rock texture. And then I'm kind of mixing this stuff with the steep surfaces. Essentially, whenever something is vertical, very vertical, then I'm applying this other kind of texture to it. And that's kind of how I broke up the look of the the basic texture from Gaea. You can see this is where the steep faces are, this kind of section, and the rest is the other one. I'm hitting X on the keyboard to swap between selected, essentially, visualizing a certain location, and then to the final. And then, yeah, displacement, same thing. Same thing goes into AXR instead of JPEG, I believe. And then I'm just applying the displacement map. And that's it for the terrain look. As I said, it's very simple. And now we come to the more interesting part. So that was kind of the terrain setup. And now we come to the scatter setup, which is, if you watch my previous video on Scarif, where I did all the palms and foliage like that, this is a way more complicated system, way more species. You can see there's a lot more going on. And the initial setup, I would say, is almost the same. But the scatter is definitely way more complicated. I will enable the frustum culling just because this will speed up the scatter. Just think if it's correct. Volume, that's the camera, right? Yeah. If I will show you the final scatter points as well, but it's like 5 million points. It takes a bit of time for this video to present. Anyways, so up here you can see these two nodes are red with this little frozen icon, and this is the generated height field from the output textures. And funky system, these two cop nodes, bear in mind these are the old cop nodes, it's not the new stuff. They are stitching together the height fields, tiles, and then creating a proper height field from one single thing. And it took me quite a bit to figure this out, but essentially terrain height maps. So I'm double clicking to hop in here. Are pulling in each of these tiles. You can see they are reading them from disk. Terrain, this is now tile Y1, X1, and then I guess we go Y1, X2, then X3, X4, and then we go Y2, etc., etc., etc. So we just combining it. So this process was manual. I couldn't do it somehow procedural, and I was creating a window resolution. Let me go to CopNat. View, viewer, comp view. Let's see if it works. Yeah, so that's one tile, a different tile, and then a window to give it a kind of resolution. And then I'm using this layer mode to maximize, or use the maximum mode, and I maximum all these layers together. So we get a line, and you can see this again took me quite a bit of time to figure out where they have to go. I was comparing them with the Gaea modes. You can see in the end I had to flip them, offset them, -1 scale. So it was quite the process to get this setup right. And then I did that for all the other layers. You can see I'm creating these slices, and then down here I'm doing another operation, I believe maxing them the same way. And then I finally have my 16K, whatever it is, the height field. Doing gamma. Why am I doing gamma? I actually don't know why. Forgot. Gamma 1.3. Well, there's some reason, I guess, just to match it properly. That's the output. And then this is you can actually see I'm downscaling by a quarter because I did not need the full res for my height field. In the end, this is now my height field, which you can generate height field from file and set the mode to a cop node. And then you can use essentially cops internally to create displacement maps. And I did the same setup for the river mat as I needed that to block stuff out. All right, so long story short, height field coming in, I'm using mask by feature, and I'm using mask by slope, mask by height to kind of isolate the bottom areas where I kind of want the water to be. And then I'm also using the river mat, which is this one coming from Gaea, and I'm subtracting this from the other one to get a really harsh mat. So this is supposedly to be some water. Initially I wanted to sim it or put some, some textures on it that are simulating water, but in the end I said, okay, it's dried up, make my life a bit easier. Right on. So biome, this is now starting the biome tree. And what did I do here? Height field, layer max, alpine. I don't know what I did here. Okay, so that's the initial setup. So biomes work with height fields because they create these environments, biomes based on physical attributes like rain, temperature, and soil. And we're setting up initial parameters, 14 degrees, precipitation is rain, essentially 700 a year. And then we are evolving these attributes, which means they are kind of, based over time. Kind of it does like a calculation, something like an erosion or something. And you can display it. So basic temperature, and you can see it evolves with elevation. So the higher up you go, the more change in temperature. So from bottom warm, high cold. So we got 15 at the valley and 10 at on the peaks here, 10 degrees Celsius, I would say. And then we can display precipitation, which is rain. You can see rain has a couple of things here. Breakups, wherever there's no rain, there's no water, there's nothing will grow. Essentially, that's what it means. And then we've got a soil, which is where good growable ground is. And you can see not everywhere is steep surfaces. Nothing can grow there because things just roll down. There's no, it's just rock faces essentially. And then we've got these other little breakup things where you can say there's rock that can't grow anything. And then obviously we have the water stream as well. Then we have height field layer. So this is a little bit more complicated. I wanted to have certain things only grow close to water. So I used the river mat to find out where water is, and I blurred it so I can create a little outline. And I used this to specify a different precipitation rain amount on these areas. And then using these height field noises, it will be quite hard to visualize, but I've got this height field visualizer down below. Let's see if this is still set up right. Yeah, so this is showing my precipitation, my rain amount between 0 and 1300. And you can see that there is more rain, more water around these rivers. And then we've got like a baseline of 700, like this semi-gray, I can go 700, and you can see what I mean. Everything else is kind of 700. So that's kind of, everything is 700, and then there is some parts which are more. And that's kind of what I'm using to scatter certain species at certain locations. And then, as I said, the thrust and culling, I'm pulling in my shot camera, I'm creating this volume, and then I'm creating just a height field mask by object. You can see that we're actually just working in this little area. And then I'm cropping my height field towards this area. And then I'm scattering all the plants on the left in this smaller section. And this should be a bit quicker. But you can already see if I zoom out, you can see that there is some green species just around the water. And then there's some stuff which is just higher up and some stuff which is just lower below. And that's kind of the overall fanciness of the system. And yeah, I'm not talking too much about how to get or like how to build these things, but I'll just hop in quickly into one. So let's go into the elderberry build, this guy. It's just a subnet I created. Inside here, I'm using OD tool library to bring in all my Alembic files. You can see I have the lowest LODs possible because we are scattering a shit ton of things. And yeah, all of these are bundled up in this thing. So we've got a lot of different variations. And then my matnet, also quite simple. I'm pulling in the textures. I have this setup copied into all my shaders. It's essentially reading primvas, unique ID, age, noise, and based off these values, it kind of does even more. It does not also color variation. So when the age is 0, it's more green. If the age is 1, it's more kind of brownish. So it's kind of transitioning. Unique ID gives me a random color for each kind of scattered point. Then I have a noise field where I can do like clusters of color. No displacement, and that's pretty much it. And I said this is kind of set up for everything the same way. And then the bottom stuff we can totally ignore because we are not using this. We are just using this merge variations thing. Moving on. So, and as I said, these builds do all the same. They all look pretty much similar, just different Alembic caches. And then let's say elderberry is one little thing. You can see these are all my elderberries. I'm not sure why the scale is so big now. Should have. Anyways, the setup is you point it to a merge location, which I just showed you, with where all the Alembics come in. And then you just hit autofill variants, and then it loads up all these things and sets all these different locations. And then I'm applying a single material to all of these things, all of these points. And then I can set the bounds radius of each little plant. And you can see I'm doing this for all these different plants. They all look very terribly because it's a very low LOD. Some, they usually all come with textures. I'm not sure, some just show them, some don't, because of, I guess, how the inputs are. But these are all my plant species. I've got these cacti as well. Barely visible actually in the final renders, but hey, I have them. Then I've got yucca, which is some kind of plant, commies, other things, bushes, boswellia, even more things. So these bottom four are USD files. So I tried and figured out a way to use tops to convert FBX to USD quite nicely. So all I need to do is point them to a location, use a pattern find based off USD, and then it just fills in all the USD files. Yeah, and then everything is being scattered, and it's actually pretty automated. So whenever there's a new terrain, these things will just kind of work. And if you want to look at the scatter points, let's switch it to full geometry. These are now my plants. You can see there's some stuff only around the water, and then the higher up we go, we see different things. It's hard to visualize, but it's working. Convert height field, that we don't need. And then if I go to this foliage thing, this is now my full scatter of all the points, the whole terrain. You can see it's quite a big number. We have 2.4 million points. And then same as before, I'm using this camera frustum to create a box. It's the fastest way we figured out is to use a box and a group. So geometry and group create using a box on points to create a culling group. You can see it takes a bit of time, but then it has the group created, and then you just kind of blast it off and you kind of just have the leftover thing here. And yeah, so the difference why I'm splitting at the bottom is the USD files have the shaders coming in using the instance path. So the materials are coming in from the instance path, and that's why I'm splitting them out, and I don't need to kind of create them on the top level. So on the top level, what I mean is I don't need to do these autofill materials things, because it comes in by default on the right hand side. I'm not sure actually why they are still here, but they are being filled in by default if it's a separate thing. Okay, so these are my foliages. You can see, oh, here they are. Some of them have textures, and again, I can render from here. And yeah, so these are it's a top-down shot, and you can see all of these guys have a nice texture and kind of works. And then the other data stream is debris, which is a bit different, but very simple. It's using the generic kind of scatter workflow, using scatter, align, attribute from pieces. I have essentially 3 different types of rocks. Once it's coming back, there we go. So I got this one, and this one. I can show the materials. Fairly simple things, and I'm using the same height field like that. And again, you can see I'm using the same masking technique using a volume, and then I'm just scattering points inside of here using the masks from the height field. So where there's high curvature, things will roll to. On steep things, there will be no rocks and stuff like that. Scatter, align to create randomization, attribute from points, copy to points, and this is displaying the centroids. But you can see it actually just does a shit ton. I said it again, a lot of little rocks all over the place, and they have random p scales and random rotations. Same as purpose, then everything is kind of baked on disk. This is, I think, also pretty big. This one has, yeah, this one is the one with 5 million. So I've got 5 million little rocks here all over. You can see how many they are. And then same idea, but with frustum culling, I'm deleting points which are outside the render camera, like that. Super nice. And then that is that. And that explains all these 3 nodes or 4 nodes. And now I'm bringing them all together. We've got the rocks and the debris and everything in here. And I can now hook up my, did I delete it? Yes, I did. And I can hook up the camera, Karma Physical Sky, hit XPU, and now let it cook. And yes, so this is now, you can see we actually are not culling the terrain because of the high mountains. If I would cull it, I would get light where actually a mountain would block it. So that's why I in the end did not do frustum culling on the environment. But the points, as you can see, are nicely broken up by the camera here, and you can see if I zoom in, everything is scattering nicely, and we got these little clusters of color along the path, and we got all the rocks being scattered and the plants and whatnot. So pretty nice system. And this is currently in shot C, which is my kind of demo shot because it uses the least amount of points. You can see it going here. I can view now from the camera location, disabled lighting, render settings. I can just go here, maybe I should actually just do this. Hook it up here, view from this node, then go to my shot camera. And this is now the render camera for this specific shot. You can see it's nicely, it's exactly what it is in shot or in the final product. And then I can quickly jump, let's say we go to shot A. This will now trigger quite a few things. It will do the frost and culling on the debris and foliage points, and it will switch to camera A. So that's why it takes a bit of time. But yeah, then the points are coming in. You can see XView is still being initialized. And once that is done, this is now my camera for my initial shot. You can see I can zoom around, find the things I need to. You can see there's lots of points in the shot. And things I didn't actually show in the final render because we were not framed that way. I have actually some cacti at the top here, some really detailed trees and such. Let's zoom in here. You can see how detailed everything is. And that's the beauty of proxies, right? Or in instances, we've got these super detailed trees. And then with all the grass, it's actually, you can actually render from so many angles and it will still look pretty nice. But yeah, we are just down in the valley, and I had it set up that these bigger trees or cacti just grow on higher locations. And in the middle ground, you have these other trees. You can see there's a cactus there. So pretty cool. And then yeah, you can use obviously shot switching. And let me talk about the cameras a little bit. So each camera has its initial settings, and then there's a little animation curve after it. So it's just very simple. You can see it's usually just 2-axis translations. And then I'm using those as my scatters, as my culling cameras. And I'm also using these as my cameras in Nuke. So I'm just using the restructure scene graph to give me unique names for these cameras because they're all named the same usually initially. So I just attached a shot A, whatever, camera names, and then I exported this to USD so I can pull them in Nuke. And the bottom section is for my render. So from here, I'm just setting the shot context manually instead of going to the context option. So I'm just setting shot to shot A, shot to shot B and such, and each have slightly different rotated lights. And then it's all being set to deadline. So render settings is honestly, you will laugh at these settings. I just said, okay, I can get away with a little. So it's a 3K, 3800 by 1400 pixels and 32 samples. So it is quite noisy. I'm just relying on the denoiser to help me out here. Around 5 minutes a frame on a 4090. On a 3080 Ti, it's around 25 minutes a frame. So it takes a bit of time on other systems, but 4090 is still the king of GPUs and it's rocking through it fairly quick. And now I would say that is the setup for this. And we can now hop into Nuke, which is quite interesting. And I can show you all the compositing tricks. All right, we are in Nuke and you can see everything is loaded up. This is the final resolution and this is with how much noise my raw renders had. And honestly, it's not bad on 32 samples per pixel essentially, but you can see on a different shot here, these trees, they are buzzing quite a bit. And you can see how the denoiser is struggling, but I said, F it, I'll just show it anyways. This is not a production shot, so usually you would bump up the samples quite a bit more. Anyways, I wanted to create the feeling of huge environment, right? So there should be a lot of haze in the shot, which means a lot of, kind of particles in the air based on the depth of the shot. So the first thing is actually not the first thing, but I added this in the end, but I wanted to add some motion blur because also it's a simple camera movement. I don't need to render motion blur. It takes a little bit longer to render motion blur. So I just use the motion blur node. It compares before and after, and then it just does a blur on that. So it's very simple, but it just smooths out the pixels a little bit, which is if you have moving cameras, everything is essentially motion blurred just because there is motion, but it's not that visible in the shot. Anyways, I'm shuffling the data into depth and then I'm grading it on the alpha. So this is my alpha, and you can see if I hover the values, this is my D pass, my Z pass, and then I'm just kind of picking values between 1200 and 2000 to create a nice feeling of haze in the air. And I'm using that then to correct the shot. And you can see I'm initially just playing with the gamma of the shadows and the distance. So I'm just lifting the shadows in the distance. And then I'm applying a grade, which is just lifting the color essentially to a kind of whatever I want to feel like, what kind of level I wanted to add haze to it. And then I applied saturation. So whatever is in the distance is being desaturated. Now thinking about it, I could have also just done this in this guy instead. So I did not have to create this and this second saturation node. But anyways, this is the setup. So that's already the haze levels I thought would be nice. I'm not sure if I adjusted this not too much. Now let's go with this. I initially had depth of field applied, but it does not make sense for these big shots because you have a different lens and a wide lens that usually don't produce that much depth of field. Applied lens distortion and applied a subtle glow on the bright parts. You can see the effect only looks like this, so whatever is bright just gets a little bit glowy. With the help of the German compositor Sebastian Schütt, he helped me a little bit with some diffusion to kind of fake bounce lighting in the shadows. You can see it's a little bit more dreamy. It adds just a little bit more glow, and then it's key mixed based on whatever is kind of in the shadows, I would guess. So whatever is dark gets this bounce light. Yeah. And then astigmatism, that was funny. Astigmatism for anamorphic. So essentially blurring the edges based on the lens. Then applying quite a bit of chromatic aberration because these lenses produce a lot of, breakup in the color spectrum. So I initially had this quite high, so you can see how strong this light kind of breaks, but then towards the center it's clean. So that's usually what these lenses do, but I reduced the effect a little bit. It was too strong initially. Vignetting, I love it because these lenses do produce that, and it helps guide the user's eye kind of towards the center of the frame. Applying my optical flare lens, so that's something I just created in a separate Nuke file. Wrote out a couple of these for the other shots as well, plussing them back over, which adds a lot of interest. Then graining it up, because that's also what cameras do. They apply grain, ISO, film grain, and you can see it's nicely in the shadows. And then if you play it, obviously you will see it a lot better. And then that's pretty much it. And then if I read it, yeah, you can see I had actually more haze. If you read it, let's see if it's the latest. I think it is. Yeah, V2. Yeah, V2. Yeah, and then this would be the final comp, and you can probably the grain is a bit much. You can argue that, but this is kind of then the look. And if I go back before, so that's 1 and 2. Raw render versus CG. That's I would argue now, looking at this now afterwards, that there is probably a bit much of the haze going on. But yeah, that's the other shot. It's probably a little bit too humpy, but I still like it. And then that is the final shot. So for this is the only shot I actually used the camera. So I used the camera node here and I pointed it to my USD file, and I was able to pick the shot camera for the shot, which is E. I used this little HUI, put it on a sphere, and then had my shot camera kind of find a nice location to render, and then I just put that into the background. It's not great, but it's just this little section, and you can see there's some weird trees in the top there, which I just said I'll ignore, no one will see, or if, then it's just a handful. So if you look closely, there's actually some floating bits. Yeah, so that is this summary, the overview of all these shots. I hoped this was a good, interesting tutorial, at least a walkthrough. And again, you can get the scene files through my Patreon. And as you know, that I am not able to upload any of the assets that I purchased, so all these Megascan things and Max3 things and such, I cannot provide. But the scene files are there, so if you have your own assets, feel free to use them instead and go about it.